Thanks for coming. I'm always happy to share about art therapy. I've been doing art since I was a little kid, picking up rocks and sticks and building things and, making things. And it's always been a refuge for me. And when I discovered art therapy in 1997, I was shocked that there was actually a field where people did this and helped other people. So I just decided, wow, this is what I want to do, because I had always used art and really strongly believed in its healing capacities. So went back to school, became an MFT, went back to school again, did my postgraduate in art therapy, and I haven't looked back since, and I love it. So when Suzanne and I talked about me doing this talk, my thought, because I work with kids in Ukiah Unified School District, and I've worked with kids for many years, for about 20 years. And I'm also in private practice in Ukiah, and I work with adults and families and kids. And then I've also been doing art therapy groups for cancer patients. And in the last year, it's kind of morphed into working mostly with cancer patients, but also with patients that have chronic illness, chronic pain, maybe lots of surgeries that have, things like that. Some Lyme's disease, Crohn's, and things like that. So I'm currently doing 2 groups a week down in Ukiah for Adventist Health, and there's a morning group and an afternoon group on Fridays. And they're 8-week sessions. It's called the Focus on Healing program. I love it. So we do 2.5 hours. Each group is 2.5 hours, and we just immerse ourselves in art. And I bring various art directives to help people integrate things. Just to explain a little bit about art therapy. What I've noticed is that when there's trauma, especially medical trauma, that there's not a lot of care given to the psychological piece and helping people integrate. So art therapy is a really great way to help with the psychological and psychosocial needs of patients. So engaging in art making is emotionally energizing. It's really helpful. I work a lot with patients who have depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety are normal responses to trauma. And so it can be energizing, it can be restorative. You're in the present when you're doing art. You're not thinking about the future or the past. So you give your whole nervous system a real break when you're in that zone, so to speak. So it can be very healing. Medical art therapy is a growing area in the medical community and in general. There's a lot more studies that are supporting things that I think art therapists have known all along, and how it helps the whole body to integrate and to heal. So medical art therapy has been defined as use of art therapy with individuals who have medical needs, who have challenges. As an art therapist, I'm also an MFT, so I've been trained to use evidence-based practices, which is cognitive behavioral work, and somatic work, which is the body. The body remembers everything. Trauma is stored in the body. Even if we don't have memories, our bodies remember. Even if we can't recall things, because trauma can be very scrambling. It can scramble the memory and brain. But the body remembers. So doing somatic work, which means going into the body, tracking what's happening in the body, can be really powerful work to help heal and integrate from trauma. And art and somatic work go really well together. So art therapy is really about process versus product. It's not about creating a pretty picture. It's about expressing how you feel. And I love this picture because this is someone who came into the cancer group and said, I just want to finger paint. It's all, and I'm like, great, let's get some finger paints, So that's what he did, and it led to lots of discovery about himself and about other things, and that had to do with his illness and managing his illness. So I always like to let people know right away that that reminds me of that Mary Oliver poem, you do not have to be good, you do not have to walk 1,000 miles. And, it's about expressing yourself and however that looks, and it can get really messy, and that's okay. So art media, an art therapist is trained to use art media very mindfully. We don't just throw stuff out there and say, go for it, There's different types of materials. There's tight and resistive materials, pencils, markers, and so on that are pretty contained. So depending on what stage of therapy and what's happening with any given person, an art therapist will decide what media to offer that person at what time, and to evoke movement and healing. So in between medium is more, oil pastels, which are kind of soft, chalk pastels, you can mush them around. And then fluid media is anything in the paints or clay. And that can be very powerfully regressive. If someone isn't, like you would never want to give someone right after a really big trauma, you'd never want to give them a ball of clay and say, go for it. It's very, you think about being an infant and kind of gooey and sloppy, it's because we're sensory beings, and so we respond to the materials. So there's a response there. So art therapists are trained to be very mindful of what they put out and why. Clay can actually be very calming, when you think about squishing and rolling and pounding. I do that a lot with kids. If they want to come into my office and calm down, it's like, okay, let's pound some clay, But after trauma, you have to tread lightly to see, where they're at. Okay, so when it comes to, working with cancer patients and working with having to make all these decisions that they have to make, whether or not to have surgery or have, radiation and all of those things, it can be really stressful. So art, doing art around it can help people sort things out. Start to see like what direction they may want to go. So the next slides after this are all of pretty much from the cancer groups I've been doing for the last few years. And it's just examples, and I'll just go over kind of why we were doing what we were doing. So one of the things that I always start people out with right away, because everyone is kind of, everyone's been shamed in art. The average person stops doing art at the age 9 because somebody said, oh, you didn't do it right. They've done studies, it's like the average age, people just go, I'm not gonna. So I have people right off the bat, when they come in, I have it set up where the paper's taped down, and I have them do, it's called a bilateral scribble. So the bilateral scribble, basically, that movement of, crossing over the midline actually activates right brain, activates unconscious material, gets left and right hemispheres kind of talking to each other a little bit better. So, and it moves people out of the realm of being out and bustling about to kind of dropping into art. It activates things, gets things going. And so it's a useful way to start, and it frees people up. Like, I don't have to make perfect art. I can come in and scribble, I can do whatever I want. There's no wrong way of doing things. So it's a great beginner. And it often activates emotions, gets things moving, affect. And so this is an image of someone who started with a scribble, and then she moved right into, this was, I think, about some emotions about her work or something. She just went right into it. And that's often how it works. So this is just heart with chalk. With the therapy groups that I do, I'll often have them check in every so often. When we begin, we do baselines of what's in your heart today, and then we do them throughout the sessions, and then at the end, we take a look at all of them. If you line work up and you see, oh, this is where I started and this is where I am now, they see progression of, integration and things that they've worked on. A real common in this, some of you might have already heard of this intervention, is to create a safe place. So when I work with groups, that's one of the first things I do, is to create a safe container so they feel like they can express whatever they need to in the container of the group. So I'll have them work with collage, which is a very safe medium. It's tight. It's a no-fail. You can find pictures that are pleasing to you, create a safe place collage, and it's a place that I encourage the patients to really to hang this up somewhere that they can look at regularly. If they're going through treatment, they can kind of imagine themselves somewhere in there, in the collage. If you could be in there, where would you be? How would it feel? What temperature would the air be? So there's a lot of imaginal work that happens, but using it as a tool. So they don't necessarily dissociate, but they can go to kind of a calmer place if they're in the midst of treatment. Everyone, when they join the group, I give them their own journal, and I encourage them to use it, and I show them lots of different ways to what to put in their journal. Maybe they could put their favorite tea bag in there, or maybe their images. I also encourage them to, once they get familiar with the scribble drawing, is that if they're having a bad day, they can scribble 20 pages in a big black pen, and when they use up their journal, I'll give them another one. So it's a tool to take it from in here and put it out here. Because in art therapy, if you externalize, all these emotions that we have, you're moving it. And as you move it, you can integrate. This is a journal image about an image that someone did who was doing chemotherapy. And for her, she just talked about feeling on fire. And so she did several images of that, of being, in the midst of it. And what was wonderful is that she could bring this to the group, and everyone around could go, yeah, I know. The people who have also gone through chemotherapy. And so, the group serves as a place for people to feel really deeply understood and can say whatever, and usually what they say, somebody else has also experienced or felt that. So it normalizes things for people. Okay. So one of the things that I see that often happens, and this happens, I think, in all kinds of trauma. In cancer, I think about, all the breast cancer patients, the disfigurement that happens through surgeries and reconstruction and radiation and all of those things, and how it affects feelings of, of kind of isolation and estrangement from family, from loved ones. So this is another thing that we work on in the groups, is what were our roles before the diagnosis, or if you want to look at trauma, what were our roles before trauma, how have they changed since then. So we start to create a cohesive narrative, which is really important for trauma in general. If someone's been in a car accident, if someone's been through a fire, if someone's, there's all kinds of things that can happen. To start to kind of create a timeline or an order of how things have been and how you've been affected and who you were before and who you are now. So actually doing that through collage or drawing and having someone there to assist you in that and not interpret and say, oh, your drawings mean this or that. I don't do that. It's more about assisting them in interpreting their own work and then what needs to come next. Well, what happened next and who was there to help? And bringing them to the present. So doing that kind of work can help unscramble trauma and help a person integrate. And symptoms usually go down. Depression, anxiety, not sleeping, not eating, things like that usually get better when you start working and taking it from here and getting it out here. Okay, so this image I asked the group to think about all the ways they were affected by their illness, psychologically, cognitively, physically, spiritually. And so this, again, is in the beginning of treatment, and this was a collage about that, about the impact of having a cancer diagnosis and treatment. So, there's lots of ways there's lots of things you could pull out of the image. After the image was done, I asked them to put the collage on a larger sheet of paper and to surround it with healing colors. So, there's things like, they can't change the diagnosis and what's happening to them, but they can self-soothe. They can do things that help, even if it's just a little bit. And if you do lots of those little bits, it starts to help in a bigger way. Okay, so the somatic work, I often do these where we do a guided visualization and check in with what's happening in the body and where we're holding pain or tension and drawing that. Then we go around and check in and people get a chance to share, whether it be a headache, it could be thoughts that they can't stop. It could be, which can be kind of a tension in your head, right? Or it can be pain in the abdomen. Someone was blowing and releasing tension during the guided visualization. Someone was filled with sadness. And then another thing sometimes I'll have them do is to pick a really soothing color in paint and to paint right over the top of the image, just to paint right over it, soothing whatever it is. I call it the antidote colors. So if it's a red hot, then what would be an antidote color? Well, maybe blue, green. Okay, let's paint over that. And there's relief. You can feel a difference in your body doing that work. These are grief and gratitude bowls. We started with grief, which is really difficult work. This is getting more into the group after a few weeks. And everyone looked at what have they lost during trauma or illness? What are the costs? And collaging that on top of this balloon. So you're creating a container. And then after we did that, which was really tough work, we talked about, well, what are we grateful for now? And that goes over the top. So when you pull it off the form, it's a vessel, and the gratitude is holding the grief. It's just working metaphorically with their images, and so it's all in there, but they end up with something that gives them hope. There's words and images of hope in the gratitude. So that's one of the things we do. This one bowl didn't want to be a bowl, it wanted to curl in, and so it ended up, and so I said, just go with it. Just, what does it want to be? And it turned into a totemic doll that everyone kind of contributed, her whole group contributed beads and things to it to help her finish it. It was really sweet. This is another intervention where we talked about illness or trauma being a chapter in one's life, so you can get it into perspective. It doesn't define a person, it's just part of a timeline within a big life. So they decorated books to kind of represent the chapter of their illness. The interior, it was what they would hope for. What do they want the next chapter to be? The outside was more about what was going on for them. Okay, so this one of my favorite books is called Managing Traumatic Stress Through Art. It's a wonderful workbook, Cohen, Barnes, and Rankin. So this is exploring strengths. The patient here chose colors for each of these words: will, faith, courage, responsibility, creativity, and then created a pathway for her that meant working towards the center, which was healing and feeling whole again. This is a breast cancer patient, a long journey towards treatment and healing. And so in this process, she was able to kind of figure out, this is what I need to do next. I need to do, okay, this is what, so it helped her organize herself a little bit around what her needs are, which is wonderful to watch. This one was a powerful piece. This was cancer. So I'll just kind of point out, this was a roundabout. So this little guy over here on the left, this was the cancer, was her image for cancer. Fighting the battle in the center, these guys having a duel. And then this was spitting out the bad, which is when the chemotherapy and her feeling toxic and wanting to purge the toxicity and the cancer. She said this one was about assimilation and kind of coming to terms with her own mortality. This one I thought was lovely. In the center, this little kid jumping over these big hay bales. She talked about remembering who she was when she was a kid before she had cancer and the liveliness in her body. And then she came kind of full circle to the dance of life, which was underwater. She loves the water and swimming, and that to her was like getting back into the flow of life, It was amazing how she just boom, 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 found these images that spoke to her. So a lot of times I will give paints and ask people just to paint anything that is just soothing shapes, and it doesn't have to be a picture. It can just be soothing movements, tracking their breathing in paint. Track your breathing now, okay, quiet a little bit, now track it again. It's just so to bring people back in their bodies. People leave their bodies, and rightfully so. It's a great mechanism that we have as human beings to do that. But in the healing process, we have to call ourselves back in. So painting is a great way to just kind of pull it all back in and be soothed by the process. We do a lot of glass mosaic, and this is more of just kind of an organizing, fun thing. I find that art that organizes, you have to sort, and you think about a baby, and how they developmentally, how they learn to sort and do that, and how it's a calming activity to do that, it organizes. And so I'm always thinking about, okay, how is this going to help therapeutically when I give people these different things to do? So I asked them to just think about an image that makes them happy and find the glass to fit, and so they made these glass mosaics. That's somebody putting the grout on, and we got into the discussion about wiping away the the darkness and letting the light come through and all that kind of stuff. We do silk painting. I think water media is very deeply relaxing once people are comfortable. It's a messy kind of media. It challenges people who are very perfectionistic and want things just so. So it helps, I think, work that edge. Yeah, they had a lot of fun with the silk paint. The other thing that we do in the group is collaborative art. I like to do processes. Sometimes I'll have people pair off into twos, into pairs, and do art together. Because what I've noticed is that when people have an illness, any chronic illness, they tend to stay home, they don't go out much, they tend to isolate. And so having somebody do response art back and forth with you is really fun, you know? And so I really try to have people have fun, which is enlivening. So, for example, if you and I were doing art together, let's say you were to draw a flower. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, what nurtures a flower? So I'm always thinking nurturing. And I kind of tell the group that, like, let's nurture each other. So, you know, I might draw the sun to shine on your flower because it helps it grow. You know, like, so you do response. Or, you know, I'll show you actually some examples here. So this was one where everybody did a collaborative, putting their hands on a big black sheet of mat board and to represent their group. This group has been together for a while and they're very bonded. And it was really sweet to see how, well, let's make room for everybody and, you know, very collaborative. Got to have glitter. Someone there really has to have glitter, so make sure she has glitter. It was very sweet. Collaborative beading project. We've done several of those where you start one strand of beads and you put your own on it and then everyone adds to it. When you get it back, it's this completed thing. And often patients have taken them in for when they have surgeries and they hang it somewhere close to their bed so they can see that and know that they're being held by their group and all the beads represent their group. So little things like that just kind of help support people through the process. This was a collaborative silk painting. It was an underwater scene, and everybody chose outside of the group, or they chose their own images, and then they brought them in, and we kind of put them all together, and then did a big painting, and it's hanging. And we had it framed, and it's hanging at the Infusion Center down in Ukiah. So, and they're very proud of that. They did a great job. So here's the painting. And we do watercolors, and so the groups that I do are really, they allow freedom to do whatever you need. So let's say we're working on watercolor painting, such as this. And someone might say, well, I really feel like I need to paint an angel, or I need to paint a frog, or whatever. It's like, okay, let's do that. So myself, and I have an art therapy assistant who's a graduate student down at Notre Dame, and her and I both are like, okay, what do you need? You know, and we're there to get that, you know, whatever media. I want to do that in clay. Okay, let's pull out the clay. So we might start with one thing, but everyone kind of branches off to follow their own path. And so my job, and Melissa, who helps me, her job is to help them get the materials to create whatever that is. For example, there was a woman who had 2 heart attacks, also a cancer patient, but had a couple of heart attacks, and so she wanted to make a heart. So it's like, okay, let's build a heart. How are we going to build a heart? We had to figure it out together. You know, we built a balloon, and then we got some tubes for valves, and we did this, create out of plaster that you make, you know, for your arm, and so, because she wanted to really explore that. What's happening with my heart, you know? So it can go in any direction that anybody needs, really. So there's a lot of freedom for growth and healing, and that's it. That's the end of my pictures. I just want to say this is a really special place for me, and my mom passed away of cancer, and I put her ashes right here. So does anybody have any questions about anything?
Do you have a studio where people gather to do this, or are you given space? Or?
Yeah, good question. Well, we were meeting at the Art Therapy Institute of the Redwoods in Redwood Valley for the art therapy groups for the cancer support and chronic illness support group. But Linda Chapman, who owns the building, lost her house in the fires, and which is right behind the studio. And so the group had to move out of that space because Linda and her husband needed to move in while they rebuild their house. So Adventist Health came up with an alternate space. It's the old Sizzler in Ukiah on Perkins Street. It used to be the Sizzler, and it was then the physical therapy building. It's right there by, it's 404, I think is the address on Perkins. So that's our new space for the groups. We do fundraising for it. They did a cancer run in the summer, and we got a couple of grants from T.R. Erickson Foundation that helps fund it, which is really great because it's expanded. I had a waiting list, and so we expanded from doing just a morning group to an afternoon group also. So I'm hoping we can keep that up. I don't know. It just depends on our donations and our funding. But it's free. The classes are free. There is an art materials fee, but it's sliding scale, so people can pay up to $8 per session or nothing. They don't, it's totally up to them. But all the art materials are provided, and I make sure and provide really good materials because I just believe in that. Much more satisfying, to have good paint, good brushes. And
you use the word that art therapy helps you unscramble.
yeah.
Could you say more about what that means?
When anyone's been in an overwhelming event, I think about the fires, and I think about, a car accident or things that are out of a person's control. The whole nervous system is affected. It affects cognition, memory, it scrambles. It's really, and the beauty, I think the body scrambles it on purpose to help soften the blow. And it's a beautiful thing. It serves a good purpose. And some people can snap back out. It just depends on how resilient people are. But some people have a hard time coming back, and they remain kind of dysregulated, So there's different ways to get people back in. I think about yoga and meditation and art and movement in any way. But accessing things, what I love about art is that it, trauma stored in right brain. Art activates that, as does movement and dance and things like that. But I have found over the years of doing this that art, the images that come up are kind of messengers from our souls, I believe, and that they can't hurt you. They help you integrate, and they help you. So whatever comes up is kind of what's asking to be looked at, and then you go from there. When you externalize something, it's out here, and it can't hurt you. And then you can look at it, and you get some distance from it, and you can look at it more objectively, like, oh, that's what happened. And often when there's been trauma, there's missing pieces. So I often will have people do a narrative where you break a paper into big sections, like a cartoon, and what happened first, what happened next, and have them draw that. And often there's lapses, like, I don't remember. Or if there's other family members there that can help, no, you got that wrong, sweetie, that didn't happen, it happened this way. Because there can be misperceptions, especially with kids, about events. And so, parents can be a big help to say, no, you got that wrong, sweetie, Daddy was there, or I was there, or the police were there, whatever. So it helps unscramble and create a cohesive narrative, which actually helps soothe the whole organism because you're putting it together. And it's not this, sleep usually improves. Eating, things like that, because you're starting to, when you think about flight, fight, or freeze, everybody does that. That's normal, to normal response to trauma. Once you kind of know someone's response, then you can work with them from there. Of course you were frozen. That's normal. People think, oh, I'm not. No, that's a normal response. So let's talk about how to get you unfrozen.
Can you speak a little bit more about the neuroscience behind trauma and maybe how art addresses it? So you just mentioned that trauma is stored in the
right brain. Right.
I find it's stored in the left.
No, left brain is more linear, linear thinking. Right brain is more affective material, emotional material, memories, and trauma are stored. what I've been seeing from more research that's coming out is that doing art activates, they're showing that it activates right brain, it gets things moving. What I love about it is it frees it up to then express, and then once you get it out here, then your left brain can start to look at it and have some understanding about it. So you start to connect instead of being reactive from this being dysregulated in trauma. Does that make sense? I mean, we could get into a whole nother discussion about developmental stages and, you know, how when there's trauma at different stages, it kind of short circuits brain development and all that stuff. But in general, that's where it's stored.
Do you know what brainwave it's stored in?
No, I don't. I haven't tracked that. But what I do notice is that if you get things moving through art, it'll bypass all this chatter. You know, like when you think about CBT therapy, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's all like from here, you know, and it really flies under that radar and goes to, I think, what is, I think, more important in some ways, what's underlying all that stuff up here. So that's why I've just seen it work. Light really is like leaving, you kind of check out, you know, you get dissociative. So you might, like, I think about kids that I work with that have been traumatized and how they can have this really rich imaginal world because that's safer to be in than being in real life. So it's more of like leaving and you're kind of spacey, checked out, you know, it can affect your memory. Where did I put my keys? You know, I mean, it's kind of a leaving, which sometimes it's what people need to do if something is so intense, you know, if they're in a intense experience. So, but then it can become a problem if they can't really re-engage. If they come back into the world, PTSD, one of the symptoms of PTSD is feeling alienated from everybody. You know, like you're an alien on the planet, you don't belong. And that's kind of comes from, you know, I'm separate than, you know, I've had to leave. Disassociated. And I think, you know, when the brain is overwhelmed by all that cortisol and all that, what happens, you know, chemically in your body when you're in trauma, I think it takes a while for things to settle down, you know, and to come back to baseline. The groups I work with all 5 senses, so I'll bring in stuff like lavender and, you know, or a variety of scents, and we'll just sit around and just, you know, smell things and taste things. And, you know, it's like, okay, we have to call ourselves back in because we've had to leave for a while because things were tough, you know, but it's okay to come back. Yeah, all those things. I think it's helpful for, you know, anybody who's been through trauma, kids, you know, pets, everybody, yeah. Yes, yeah. I have a private practice in a kind of a studio office in Ukiah, and I see patients and our clients. Yeah, I use art therapy a lot to. Yeah, depending on what's going on, you know, people are going through divorce or going through, you know, transitions, depression, anxiety. There's lots of ways to explore, you know, all of those things through art. And it's often surprising. It's a new way to find out about yourself. It's a new way because things will come up that you don't expect. And that's what I love about it, that someone will do a collage and they didn't really realize until like, oh my gosh, there's that. And and look at how. So there's always gifts in it. There's always ways, you know, that it'll speak to you in a way that maybe you wouldn't have thought of otherwise, which I value a lot because I've just seen it be helpful a lot over the years. So, yeah. Yeah, and especially for, you know, I think about people who are really smart and like have an answer for everything. Yeah, and so it's great, you know. And it can be very gentle, you know. It's not about like I said before, it's not about creating a beautiful masterpiece. It's about really exploring, the terrain. And often there's a lot of stuff, and then it's, it'll make sense. And an art therapist is really there just to kind of be aware of all those things, developmental things, attachment. Every person is unique, family history, all of that stuff, health issues, and then, helping guide someone through interpreting their own images, really. To register for the cancer groups, really the only criteria is that you've had cancer at some point in your life. I have one person who had it 20 years ago and is just now wanting to kind of reconcile some things. I mean, depression and anxiety, I think, go along with having had cancer or dealing with a chronic illness like Crohn's or Lyme's or something like that. It's not a mental health group. It's more for cancer patients or chronic physical illness. Though I've been having more and more calls for depression groups and anxiety groups and things, but hasn't materialized yet. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.